Hey guys, Buildzoid here, and if it looks like I'm dying, it's because the summer is getting to me. Seriously, it is so hot. Even at night now, it's so hot. Like, it's hot outside, it's hot everywhere. I'm melting. I feel like a CPU on a stock cooler. Or an R9 290X reference card. Anyway, today I want to talk a little bit about this motherboard and my findings with it, because it is interesting, okay? And I've not yet done VRM thermal testing, and I don't expect it to do particularly well in that department because the VRM on this thing is quite frankly unimpressive. The heat sinks are questionable. They're better than what Asus has, but I think at this point Asus is like like having better heat sinks than the Asus X470 Prime Pro motherboard is a low bar, because those heat sinks, not really heat sinks. But yeah, so I've not done VRM thermal testing on this, but I've spent a lot of time overclocking with this motherboard. You might be sitting there going like, wait a minute, why have you spent so much time overclocking with this motherboard, you Gigabyte fanboy? I'm not a Gigabyte fanboy. It's just like, this has BCLK overclocking, all right? And it has fully functional, on the newer BIOS, Precision Boost Overdrive. On the BIOS I did the walkthrough for, this has fully functional Precision Boost Overdrive. And that leads to some very interesting things. And also at the same time, like, basically, BCLK, and it has offset voltage, and it has PBO. And these three things together make for a most interesting Ryzen 2700X overclocking experience. Because otherwise, if you're overclocking a 2700X, it's kind of boring, it's kind of ineffective, and you don't really get very far. But with BCLK offset voltage and PBO, you can do some interesting things if the motherboard was any better, because there's some downsides. So I've tested PBO, and basically, like, I've finally figured out kind of a good test mixture. Turns out the best way to test the single core, well, lightly threaded workload boost, because it's not like the lightly threaded boost speeds, is DirectX 11 heavy CPU bottleneck. So we're talking like way too much GPU firepower. So like crossfire setups. And very old, like very low demand benchmarks. So 3D Mark Skydiver and Unigine Heaven HWBot Extreme preset. The HWBot Extreme preset is like 1600 by 900, and it's run at, what is it? And I run it without tessellation. So I threw an HD 7990 at those two benchmarks, and when you do that, the CPU spends a lot of time at 4.35 gigahertz or higher even once you mix in the BCLK. Because that's the thing, PBO does not increase your maximum single core boost at all. Or all it really does is it cranks up your maximum your maximum boost. Okay, wait. Yeah, the maximum boost frequency doesn't actually go up. It just gets more voltage, which is really dumb as far as I'm concerned. Like, seriously, it's like the last thing anybody ever wants, right, when overclocking, is for the voltage to just go up without the frequency changing. But that's what PBO does. Basically, if you set the scaler to 10x, which I know AMD's like, oh, you shouldn't set the scaler that high, but testing, which is why you should have offset voltage, mind you, because then you can really max out that scaler. But if you set the scaler to 10x, your single core, your max boost voltage goes from like 1.4-ish volts to 1.5-ish volts. And your frequency stays the same, right? Unless you have BCLK overclocking, your frequency will stay the same. So you need offset voltage, because on the lower scalars, the interesting thing is basically, as you crank up the scaler, your higher thread count frequencies get closer and closer to your max frequency. So that 4.35 gigahertz, they come up. The problem is your voltages actually rise faster than they need to, so you need offset voltage so that you can lower the voltage back down so that you don't get thermally limited and drop frequency again. Because that's the thing. It's like, if your voltage goes up more than your, like your frequency goes up like 100 megahertz and your voltage comes up 100 millivolts, you're gonna like it's gonna run so hot you're gonna lose that 100 megahertz to thermal throttling because PBO is overly sensitive to temperatures. Seriously, it drops so much frequency for temperature difference, it's ridiculous. But if you have the offset voltage, you can compensate for that, which means this board has actually been really, really decent with, like, even if you didn't touch the BCLK, this thing has gotten pretty impressive Cinebench results, where it was like, I think I got like, I managed to get like 1850 or 1865, you know, that kind of score range by basically just maxing out the scaler and then throwing a negative voltage offset on there and not touching the BCLK at all. Now, once you get the BCLK mixed in, things get really interesting because your stability goes to hell. Okay, like stress testing, stability, all of this stuff just, oh man, it gets really, really bad because the problem is single core Cinebench, for example, boost spends like 16 or 10, like very low, the single core Cinebench running, the amount of time spent at max frequency is very, very low. It tends to stay one speed step down. But if you run something like Unigine Heaven, it actually spends almost the entire benchmark at full speed, at the full maximum frequency. And it's just like, and when it does that, it tends to crash a lot because, well, hey, you're finally getting that stress test you wanted. But yeah, so, you know, I've kind of figured out how to test it. It's still extremely crash happy, but it's also spat out some pretty interesting scores. Like, I've managed to get this motherboard to spit out almost 1900 Cinebench at like 1895 by, you know, I think 102 BCLK with maxed out scaler. That got me around 1900. Now, the problem was, at that point, it wouldn't finish the single core test, it wouldn't finish Unigine Heaven, it wouldn't finish literally anything because the frequency for those was way too damn high. But it did do pretty, you know, impressive things for the single core test. And the issue with this motherboard is its VRM definitely holds back the CPU frequency. Like, I could probably run a much bigger negative offset on the voltage if I had a better motherboard, because the VRM on this thing is really unimpressive. And so basically I'm thinking I really want to pick up, like, I think the Gaming 7 might actually be kind of the best option for PBO overclocking. Now, I do intend to buy it because of this, which I'm really annoyed about because I didn't really want to buy the board because it doesn't have like, if it had an HDMI output, then I'd be like, hell yeah, because then I can, like, go to town with the APU. Because you know what I found out? The Strix X470-F, no BCLK on that. So it's just like, I want a motherboard to do some, like, serious APU overclocking on, and I can't find one because none of them have BCLK, and it's just like, oh. But because of that, basically it means I don't need to buy the Strix. I think the only motherboard that has an HDMI port is, like, the ASRock Taichi, but we all know how I feel about ASRock's BIOS, in that I'd rather die than use an ASRock BIOS. But anyway, so basically, it's like this thing has just kind of surprised me with its PBO capabilities. And because of that, I think I really need to get my hands on a 6-core. Because this is definitely, like, I think on the 8-core, the VRM on this thing is really struggling just in terms of the output ripple and the, like, basically the voltage quality, right? How close to a flat line this is, pretty far, okay? And if we say I want the voltage to be a flat line, this is probably going to be spitting out anything but a flat line because it's a 4-phase, so it inherently has really high, you know, ripple voltage. You have no LLC settings, you have no switching frequency settings, which I don't think the Gigabyte X470 Gaming 7 has either, but at least that's a 10-phase. So, you know, just because of that, it should have a lot less voltage ripple on it than this thing does. And because of that, I think, you know, PBO on that board could be a lot more impressive. But with the 2700X, it could be a lot more impressive on that board. But with the 6-core, this VRM would have to do a lot less work to, you know, not to maintain voltage regulation. And so I really, really want to try out a 6-core. So yeah, I might ask for like I'm probably gonna ask for like a 2600 or a 26. Actually, I'd really like to try a 2600. Just, you know, because the X CPUs, like, ideally I'd want to try both, but realistically I can't ask for everything. I mean, even the 2700X that I've been using so far is on loan. So, you know, thank you alza.co.uk for providing the CPU that I can test at all, because otherwise I'd be buying one, and that's like, a 2700X is like, what, 3 motherboards? 2 or 3 motherboards? So that'd be like 2 or 3 motherboards less in terms of what I could test. So, yeah. But this thing is just like, yeah, PBO is, like it's interesting. But the thing is, this motherboard is just like, the VRM is unimpressive. And the other issue this motherboard has is the memory overclocking. It sucks at that. It is so bad at memory overclocking. So when I started testing the PBO, I started with, basically I did 2133 megahertz, you know, just baseline tests, everything stock at 2133. And then I went to 3333. And 3333 on the 2700X still works. More than 33 or 33 on the 2700X with this motherboard doesn't work at all. And that's really interesting because that 2700X, unlike the MSI motherboards, does like 3600 CL12. So it's not the CPU it's not a problem of the CPU. It's definitely this motherboard. And my APU, in fact, shows similar things where it's like, this motherboard has a hard limit around 3200 to 3300 megahertz memory clock, because past that, this thing gets super unstable, which is really unfortunate because, hey, it has BCLK and it has PBO work and the offset voltage. So like, you can do, you know, PBO on this board works really well, just memory overclocking doesn't. And the thing is, the competitor boards in this price bracket don't have the BCLK overclocking, most of them. It's like, the BCLK is just super, super rare feature to have. And actually, MSI boards don't even have offset voltage control. So on the MSI boards, you're like really screwed, because you're basically stuck with PBO's stupid voltage decisions. And they are stupid. Like, they just are. Okay, that's just a fact. And yeah, because, so it's like, this board, it's like, so I really want to test like well, I think the Gaming 7 has potential to be like really, really impressive. And this could maybe work for like a 2600X based system, maybe with AFR memory or something that doesn't, well, AFR could clock high on a motherboard that has good memory support, but like, if you didn't really want to mess with the memory too much, it could work pretty well on this. But yeah, so basically, I'm going to be buying the Gaming 7, and I'm also going to be buying the Master SLI next. And yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts on PBO so far, and I do think, like, I need to test a 6-core. I mean, I'm kind of tempted to just take the 2700X and run it in 6-core mode and see what happens then. But I feel like that would be kind of cheating. Like, it wouldn't like, I don't know if there'd be major differences, but at the same time, I also want to try out a non-X CPU just to see if, you know, maybe those don't benefit from your good old-fashioned all-core overclocking more. But, yeah. So, that's kind of that. You know, I just wanted to share all of that because I have done a lot of testing, and I don't really like, because here's the thing, it's like not particularly good testing. It's like, I have a bunch of anecdotal, like, I've written down test results, but they're not like complete, like they're not full scaling lists, because it's just like, because, you know, I'm testing things and it's just like, oh, this doesn't work, and then there's a bunch of results that don't make any bloody sense, which is why there's no proper formalized video, because it's just like, oh, that's odd. Why isn't that working? So yeah, but because of that, like, it's so odd. Basically, if you ignore PBO, this motherboard is terrible, like really terrible. But then if you actually want to mess with PBO, then this motherboard at this price point is like the only option, because the other boards don't have BCLK. And it's not, like, at that point, it's not even a matter of how well is the board implemented. It's just like, the other boards literally can't do this. They just can't. Okay, this board might be bad at it, but the other ones literally can't do it at all. So at that point, it's just like, well, how do you score that? Right? Because, yeah, that's just like a sort of very interesting just situation with this motherboard, which I figured I'd want to talk about. Yeah, because yeah, I don't know. It's like this video. I like this video sucks. It sucks so bad. But like, I still wanted to point this out because it's just so interesting to me that there's this motherboard where it's just like the VRM is probably holding it back. The memory overclocking freaking sucks. Like frequency wise, timing wise, I think it's actually okay. I still need to test the timing some more, but frequency wise, it's definitely really bad. Timing wise, I'm not yet sure. Actually, no, I think timing wise it's fine because I was running 12, 12, 12 for some testing. Was it this board? Or was it some other board? No, it was this board. It was this board with the APU. I was running 12, 12, 12 at tight subtimings and was doing fine. So yeah, timing wise, it's fine. It's just not high frequency. But yeah, and it has the BCLK, and then it's just like, oh, and then it has the really janky voltage control, no LLC, no VRM settings, no, it's just like, yeah. But it has potential, and I just wanted to highlight that because, yeah, it's just interesting to me. Like, because, like, that's the thing. It's so hard for me to compare this motherboard against the other boards. Is just like, this board does things the other boards don't do. And now, honestly, if we measure it in terms of like performance gain, it's a marginal difference. Okay, the MSI board, if you run Cinebench on it with the 2700X with PBO, for all core, you're probably going to be looking at like 1850. Yeah, around 1850. Though it might slide down because of the really high voltage. So, that's the other issue with PBO is it's super inconsistent because as your temperature goes up, your scores go down. And then it's like, if I test at noon, I get different results than if I test in the evening because the temperature in the room changes so much. So, like, that's really, really annoying. But, yeah, like, so far, this is the only motherboard where with PBO, I've seen 1900 Cinebench, and I've also consistently, with this board, managed to get like 185 points single core Cinebench, which the problem with single core Cinebench is like Cinebench really, like when it hits that one core, it hits it hard. So it doesn't really like to boost as high as if you run Unigine Heaven. Like if you watch, if you watch Cinebench versus Unigine Heaven on the oscilloscope, Cinebench has like these really widely spaced, it's a really widely spaced out square wave. And then if you run like Unigine Heaven, it just like pegs it to the highest possible voltage almost constantly. So it's in that top power state and it's doing like 4.4, 4.5 almost the entire benchmark. The flip side to that is that it also crashes all the bloody time, which is just great. But yeah, it's like I just figured I'd point that out because it's like it's so interesting. Like, yeah, I just thought it was interesting. I guess I'm wasting your time at this point, aren't I? But yeah, I don't know how to score that. It's like that's the main issue is just like because I need more CPUs. That's the thing. I need, like, for this motherboard, to make up my mind about this motherboard, I'd need to run other CPUs through it. Because if it turns out that with, like, a 2600 or a 2600X, it's still only, like, 1 or 2% better. Because that's the thing. On the 2700X, this board, I feel like, is just hitting the limits of its VRM, and you can't really stretch the limits of what PBO can and can't do. But if you had, like, a 2600X, I think there's a pretty good chance that the VRM wouldn't be as overtaxed as it is. And with that, with that taken care of because of the lower core count, this thing could actually do even better in Cinebench, all core, and it could do, like, single core I think would still have similar limitations just because, hey, it's 1 core out of 8 versus 1 core out of 6. When the 6 cores, when the rest of the cores aren't being used, they really don't pull that much power. So, but I think, like, because with the 2600X or the 2600, if I tested that CPU on this board and then some of the other boards, and it was like, okay, so on the MSI board, the 2600, I don't know, let's say it tops out at like 4.1 gigahertz because AMD bins I think they bin the 2000 series really, really aggressively. So let's say the 2600 topped out at 4.1. I don't know. I don't have, 100 plus 2600s to figure out what frequency they hit. But if it did top out at like 4.1 on the MSI motherboards, and then on this board it did like 4.075 all core, which this board's VRM really is not that impressive. It might even do 4.1. I'm not sure. But let's say it just hits on most boards, it hits like 4.1 all core. But then on this motherboard, you can really, you can, like, I'm not sure the 2600 even supports PBO. But if it does, you could really like lay into it on the Precision Boost Overdrive so that you'd have like 4.1 all core or 4.05 all core, because PBO, the problem with PBO is it generally doesn't do what you want it to do. You can get it pretty close to what you want, but you can't get exactly the clock you want, because in a perfect world, PBO for me would hold 4.15 gigahertz all core, 4.26 core, 4.25 4 core, 4.3 2 core. Okay, no, that's actually wrong. Like 4.45 single, 4.352, 4.254, 4.26, and 4.158. Yeah, steps like that, that kind of frequency stepping. That would like make sense. But the problem is PBO doesn't tend to be like, you don't have that much fine control over it. So you can sort of aim for where you want your single core and where you want your all core by changing the scaler, because the scaler brings those two together and all the other frequencies just kind of get jammed in between. And you don't have like fine control over those, so you just kind of have to deal with whatever it gives you. But like I could totally see something like a 2600 with a low scalar value so that you have a really big gap, because your single core would be still like 39x, and then you could run like 104 or 105 BCLK, and it would give you like 4.2 4.3 single core, and then 4.1 4 to 4.1 all core, and you'd have like this really, like, that would actually be a really impressive overclock for a 2600. And the other motherboards just can't do that. Just straight up can't do that. And then that, in my opinion, would be like a huge win for this board. If it actually worked like that, I need to get a 2600. So, yeah. But that's basically my thoughts. The 2700X is just kind of overloading the motherboard, which is why I went to get the Gaming 7. And then Master SLI board just because everybody keeps nagging me about it. But that doesn't have BCLK, so it's just like, run-of-your-mill bog standard motherboard, in my opinion, there. Yeah, that's kind of interesting. But as long as it has the offset voltage, I think you could still work with it. Because here's the thing, as long as you have the offset voltage, you can at least get you can really close the gap between your single core and your all core. Because otherwise your all core just gets way too much voltage and it falls off a cliff, as, I said earlier. I am really over repeating myself here, but yeah, that's just kind of my findings so far. I've also destroyed a whole bunch of other stuff this week, which is why there was no videos, because between testing this thing and being very confused about how it's behaving, and then being like, oh my god, I finally figured it out, and then going like, no, I haven't, it's still crashing all the time. But, other than all of the testing I did with this motherboard, I've also managed to let's see. So, rack up a body count, again, would be one way to put it. And we'll go into details some other time. Anyway, thank you for watching. Sorry for this being, this bad. It's just like, I don't know. I'm not good at making videos, damn it. And some people might be like, write a script. Yeah, see, I would need to know what I want to put on the script when writing the script. So, yeah, that's that. But yeah, thanks for watching. Like, share, subscribe if you'd like to support what I do here with actually hardcore overclocking. I have a Patreon and PayPal and t-shirts you can buy. You can find a link to all of that down in the description below. And also, before we sign off, thank you to the patrons and, all the people who do use that link down in the description below for, funding the purchase of this here motherboard, as well as all the other motherboards that I'm about to go buy. And thank you to alza.co.uk for providing the 2700X that I've been using for testing so far. It's on loan. I don't own it, but huge thanks to them for providing that, because that's like 2 or 3 motherboards right there in a CPU, like value-wise. So, yeah, and they're a large European e-retailer, and right now they're still having a sale on a whole bunch of LN2 pots. So if you want to pick up an LN2 pot and you're in Europe, you should go check that out, because generally speaking, LN2 pots are pretty damn expensive if you want to buy them, and this is like a really good opportunity to get them at like a good price. I'll leave a link to that down in the comments below the video. So yeah, to the sale. So that's it for the video. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.